Hello everyone, this is Epsilon Core. This is kind of a progress report on my project. Uh, Needless to say, my end goal is to make something that, well, looks almost nothing like this. That being said, this is me having come recently out of a tutorial. I haven't really completed all of the tutorials yet. That being said, this is a case of me just experimenting in order to find out, um, essentially, as a means of finding out how to properly use the tools that I have been taught in said tutorials. The tutorials that I have recently watched is specifically Zenva, so I have from Zenva Academy. Though I have also watched tutorials from a YouTuber known as Brackies. In fact, a lot of the progress here is actually due to help from Brackies servers, specifically from users Gulmorg and please give me a moment. Gulmorg and Harry Fishnuts. I am not making these names up. So, based on what we have learned, we've learned how to create prefabs and add scripts to them. This was primarily done as a practice after I was shown how to create what was called a balloon popping game by the Zenva tutor. The simple function based on this balloon controller script is to create a public integer that will count down based on the number of times you have clicked it. When the integer goes down, it will apply a transform local scale onto the entity that will increase its size by a factor of 0.22, and after a set amount of clicks, or when a number of clicks is reached, the game object will be destroyed. I decided to take this and apply it to my the first script that I made that is applied to my little character here. The camera is partially linked to the prefab. So in order to create a kind of pseudo third-person shooter appearance. So let's get into the scripts and the script that is controlling this entity and show you what exactly I've managed to do. This is far from a recommended method of movement, but essentially what I did was I created a set of new buttons. I didn't want to risk using the pre-existing buttons because there were certain variables that I wasn't comfortable with playing with yet. I'm gonna leave this. You could argue that why am I doing this considering that I'm already experimenting beyond the scope of the original lesson. But I think it's important that we take our challenges where they will, or where you're comfortable. So this was based on a prior lesson, which was to create vectors that could affect that would affect the location of the current area. These are location vectors, or I'll call them location vectors. And what they are is simply a set of instructions, or they are a set of values that will run across the X, Y, and Z axes. So as you can see, this could have been honestly vastly streamlined simply by having a horizontal and vertical. And now that I think about it, you could very easily argue that this is what having using default button, because they have reverse actions. So the basic idea is this vector is to create a value that will alter the entity's location. I am hard pressed to call it movement per se, because it really isn't movement in a conventional sense. You are altering the logic of the code in order to redefine the location of the object. You could also potentially make these entities public. I'm gonna just check to see if I could do something like that. See if it would affect anything good. And let's see. All right. Actually, yes. This would actually make it a lot easier. So I'm going to do a quick on-scene alteration in order to perhaps, if I wish to come back to this. Again, this is all more or less a progress report and just kind of a little experiment just to see how it all works. So by adding publics in front of all of them, I can essentially change how far in the different directions I can go. In fact, I could, you could easily kind of create more control over how far this character goes. Say if you want to have a character that moves forward by 1, moves backwards by 2. I don't know why you would want to do that, but sometimes having a large amount of tools at your disposal can really help the creativity, Sometimes having bizarre mechanics can help. I'm just gonna move on before I become lost in my own rambling. Regardless, so this was the part that I was mostly caught on. You see, because I was basing it on the Zenva tutor's original balloon controller, which is on mouse down, I really wasn't sure how one would input a button command. The way that you would do it is that if you would have an if in front of it, which would signify it as a boolean or a boolean. Another prior mistake that I had made was that I actually put all of this code in void start. Now that was a mistake because what void start does is that it runs the scripts at the start of the game and doesn't run them again. Void update is really where you want to set it up. So essentially void start is it's your setup location, I guess. I was kind of confused because going back to balloon, the tutor didn't seem to need to put this in void start or void update. In fact, he actually put it in a completely different location. I guess if you put this one in void start, it would suffer the exact same problems. I'm trying to mess around with the camera controls, and so far I've been hitting dead ends. That is a to me, I think that is a clear example of I haven't learned enough to truly understand the mechanics appropriately to start experimenting. I am still in training, and this is far from the final project of what I want to make. My final project isn't really even 3D, I would argue, but whatever. But sometimes you just have to learn, and a lot of the tutorials are based around making a 3D game. So just gotta do as the tutor says. So after all of my pitfalls, after much help from once again the Brachy server, which is if you notice, I initially mentioned a YouTuber named Brachy, which has tutorials here on YouTube. That is his server. So if you want to join us on Brachy server, just look for Brachy on YouTube. Find his Discord server, and which should probably be somewhere in the description of his YouTube channel. And follow us. We'll be glad to have you with us. Some of us are all lost on this, and you know, who isn't lost on their first time? Let's be honest. So, anyway, now that I've shown you all the preamble and all the scripts, all the internal mechanisms, I've often described coding is kind of like making a Rube Goldberg machine, except you make all the mechanics down to the very tiniest detail. Anyway, let's do this. Alright, so we have the initial program that that was trained by the Zenva Academy tutor. Essentially, I click this balloon, it gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger. Now, originally it's supposed to pop after 3 clicks, but I figured I wanted it to be 5 clicks. Because 5 makes me horny. Anyway, yes, as you can see, it works as well as can be for a first time. I haven't figured out the basis for rotation yet. In fact, if you look back at my camera script, you will notice that I wanted to make what's called a Skycam. The problem with that is that it would require me to write a script that would rotate this camera down towards the player. That was unlikely to work in my favor, because I can't even get this character to rotate left and right properly. Camera control was my attempt to also try to move the screen cam, the cam that's behind the character, between shoulders. Well, from its right to its left, I suppose. So you notice that if I move into here, essentially I end up clipping through the object. Now for a 3D game, that is a little weird. As you notice here in Unity, a lot of 3D objects come with their own built-in colliders. So you'd think that, the character shouldn't be able to just phase through. But remember what I said, like, we're not actually moving in a conventional sense. This is redefining the script is designed to redefine the location of the player character based on button inputs. So essentially, it is like teleporting. That's why I actually I named a lot of the buttons teleport buttons. If you look down here, yes, teleport W, teleport S, A, and D. Now, actually, I should have made a public of up and down as well, because I do have an up and down, and once again, it's not a conventional jump or rise and drop function. Essentially, yeah, it's the same thing, but along the y-axis. So once again, I can phase through this wall because, again, I'm not really moving. But the purpose of this was essentially as a means of using this character to I guess, travel along this map, this kind of map that I kind of created. Obviously, exploration will be incredibly difficult if I can't bloody turn. On top of that, another issue that would inevitably come out is that even when I figure out how to turn, it wouldn't control like how it would look. Keep in mind the WAS and D functions, as well as the vector relocation functions, are tied from the perspective of the world. It is reading the world's interpretation of the location, not from the perspective of the character itself. So say if my little pill boy, okay, like, I'll show you. So if my little pill boy here were to turn to the right, like say, alright, turn to the, fuck. I said right and I turned him left. I am a fucking genius, aren't I? Anyway. Yes. If I were to turn our little pill boy here to the left and move him along the you will see that he has moved across the z-axis. In other words, let's see if I can play this. Yes. So if I were to move forward, I would actually, if I press W, instead of moving forward from the perspective of my character, I would actually be moving right. Because according to the world, based on how I've programmed it, that is what forward is. It doesn't matter if my character says if my character thinks it's forward, the camera, it is following the location of the world, and this will get disorienting fast. So yes, I will admit this is very, very flawed. But for a first timer, I think it works. It works as well as someone who has literally just gotten into this a few weeks ago should. And on top, that being said, I guess I should really get back to it. Thank you for giving me some of your time. Before I go, I will show you as to what a lot of my what my end project is, my intentional magnum opus. Just kind of to show you what I want to do one day. Game plan, was it? Alright. So I didn't really start out as a game designer or as any kind of programmer. I was initially an artist. So of course I am actually decently adept at art. These are my characters, and one day I want to make a game based on them. Kind of multiplayer character combat game. Just quickly grab the level design, because that actually shows a much better display as to what the gameplay itself will actually be, what the combat, the thing that you'll actually be playing the game for. So, yes, this is it. As I said, the end game isn't actually going to be a 3D game. It's actually going to be a 2D game. The character will be able to move left and right freely, well, forward and backwards freely from the perspective of the character, and move left and right along these lanes. This is in order to reduce confusion when it comes to shooting, because this is also going to be a shooter type game. And essentially, before I even developed the lane system, well, thought of the lane system, I haven't developed anything yet. The problem is that without the lane system, it would be difficult for the game to discern whether aiming up was going to be aiming at the camp, would be aiming at an enemy in the air versus aiming at an enemy to the left of the character. So let's say, okay, let's say we have this character here and he's jumping, and oh dear, I'm just gonna have to swap this character out for a moment. Let's say this character here was jumping, and wait a moment. Ah, here it is. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong character. Alright, let's say for a third time this character is jumping. So based on its placement on the ground, it is on this lane, but it is in the air. How would it be able to discern from oh dear. How would it be able to discern from this character in the air versus this character who's on a completely different lane, and technically he should be behind, who's in a completely different lane, or exists in a different location spatially along the x-axis? The z-axis? No, wait a moment, that makes no sense. No, y usually is up, so that would mean x-axis, yes. Anyway, how would the game be able to discern between this character here, who's off to the left according to the x-axis, and this character who's in the air based on the y-axis? Well, the problem is you can't. This was the entire reason why the lane system was developed. In order to, and the general premise is that once you are on a lane, your aim is essentially locked to that lane. Sorry. Once you are on a lane, your aim is locked onto that lane. In other words, even if there was a character, like say Mr. Four Smile here, was up here, and you were to aim at him, you wouldn't be able to hit him because he exists in a different location spatially to the rest, compared to the rest of the characters. This is, again, to prevent confusion. It's better to have set parameters. Regardless, this is the ultimate end goal. Like, I spend a lot of time drawing these characters, designing these characters. I'm still drawing their sprites. So I hope you join me along this project. I really do. Well, I've got to go. I did promise someone else that I was gonna help them with their map design on their own game. Have a nice day wherever you are, no matter what time. Cheers.